slap in the face. And I mean, Manchester...
For kicking the ghoulies, mate. It's not a slap in the face. Worse than that.
Okay, yeah, it makes your eyes water. Manchester, for us, from up here in the northeast, is still pretty far south.
Yes.
I mean, it's it took me an hour, it takes 2 hours to drive.
Yes,
okay.
Especially when it's busy.
It's 140 miles. You've got to go over the Pennines. The East Coast Main Line is fantastic. When I was...
It's not even halfway up the country, is it, Manchester? If you include Scotland, it's not even halfway up there.
When I was working on government projects in education, I used to travel to London regularly. 2 hours and 50 minutes, down to King's Cross. Terrific. Yeah. Really good. They did start holding meetings in New York for a short while, but which is even better. Yeah, but that didn't last long when they closed the offices down. But we're okay. That East Coast Main Line is all right. Okay, but you can't go anywhere else. It takes me longer to get to Birmingham on the train and twice the price than it does to get to London.
Yeah.
Okay, and the tracks are shut. Try and work on that train. Your laptop doesn't stay still for a second. You get travel sick. The tracks are so bad. The trains are so bad. It's appalling.
Well, it should just be, in many ways, a no-brainer to have a really good or much superior railway infrastructure for all of the reasons that you've alluded to. But the government is flirting with the idea of nixing it. And I don't fully understand why, except, and this perhaps is where Robin Rotherham had the beginnings of a point, except in the context of saying we can't afford it. And then you sort of find yourself asking, well, what can you afford? It's a bit like inheritance tax, which someone's calculated how much Rishi Sunak will save. Personally, I'm not suggesting that's the main reason why he's in favour of abolishing it, but goodness me, it must have turned his head a little bit. Thank you, David. I'm late for this. 11:35 is the time. Quite a few people asking me why the BBC and others have not reported or did not report on the Rejoin March that unfolded in London on Saturday. And I don't know, to be honest with you. I mean, if it had kicked off, they would have done, but... I know that France 24's UK correspondent was there, Benedict Pavio, who we've spoken to a few times. She reported from the scene, and I quote, tens of thousands of people who've come from all over the United Kingdom converged here in London in the heart of Westminster. The German MEP, Terry Renke, was there. She told PA that the march showed the UK had managed to build one of the biggest pro-European movements all across Europe. And it's always hard to get exact numbers on this kind of thing, but the Spanish media reported, El Mundo put the number of attendees in the thousands, saying that it received more coverage in the international media than in the local. So that's, it is scandalous and bizarre that the BBC are refusing to cover it, said Peter Benson, one of the spokespeople for the NRM, the National Rejoin March. And I don't know. I can only speculate, as you do as well. I know there was is Robbie Gibbs still on the board at the BBC, the fellow that used to work for Theresa May? I know that an instruction went out not long after the referendum that the BBC was going to sort of pretend that it wasn't still an issue and that all of the questions had been answered. I think Robbie Gibb was the bloke that told people not to interrogate the £350 million for the NHS claim on the side of the bus. If you've scored a glorious victory, I would have thought you'd want your critics to carry on talking about it forever, because the more they talk about it, the stupider they look. The better everything goes, then the sillier Project Fear becomes. But actually not wanting it covered, not wanting it to be talked about, just looks weird. I don't know why the BBC made that decision, is the short answer, but well done everybody who did turn up. And well done the international media for doing a better job than the British media on reporting on something happening in Britain. 11:37 is the time. I wonder if they're better on HS2 than I am so far. But I never give up. I take it as a challenge. Peter is in Barnet. Peter, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Peter.
I was involved in the Eurostar project, the high-speed train that runs between London, Paris and Brussels and Amsterdam from the very beginning. I joined Eurostar in 1992.
Okay.
We opened the service in 1994. But at the beginning of the service, we were running out of Waterloo Station on the slow lines all the way through Kent down to the Channel Tunnel. And it took us in the region of about an hour and 40 minutes to get from London to the tunnel. In 2006 and 2007, the HS1, High-Speed Line 1, was opened between London and the Channel Tunnel. Yeah. And that more than halved the time it took us to get from London down to the Channel Tunnel. But it also increased the numbers of passengers. so much quicker once they're open to get from London to Paris and Brussels and then on to Amsterdam. The same thing's going to happen with HS2. HS2 is very much needed because we've got a divided country. The Manchester, Leeds area, the middle of the country up there is so much worse off than the wealthy southeast.
How does it help? How does HS2 change that, just in your view? Because some people are unclear.
Because at the moment it takes roughly 2 hours, 20 minutes on a fast train from Manchester to London.
Yeah.
With HS2, it's 1 hour 11, so it's virtually half the time. It brings Manchester, time-wise, so much closer to London. And why is that important? I'll give you a good example. In France, there's a city in northern France called Lille. Now, Lille was becoming quite a depressed city because it's in the middle of the coal mining area in northern France. The French railways built the high-speed line from Paris out to Lille and then on to Calais. But as soon as that line was opened in France, Lille became a thriving city. Today, it's got so much more investment. There's new industries built up around it because it's now 1 hour away from Paris.
Why? I'm not being thick, but why is that? Because I can see that the speed of the link would increase the catchment area for people who would work in London but live elsewhere. But why does it bring business to areas that are currently 2 hours from London by making them 1 hour from London? I'm not doubting what you're telling me. I just want you to explain it.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't know exactly why, because I'm not a businessman.
Fair enough, but it does, and it worked in Lille, and you can point at the examples where it does have that impact.
It does have that impact very much, and it did have that impact as well at Ashford in Kent until, unfortunately, the pandemic came along and we had to shut the station at Ashford. But that did attract a lot of investment at Ashford because it became much closer to the continent.
Yes, okay, I get it.
But there's another thing that a lot of people are missing.
Go on.
When France was the first country in Europe to build a high-speed train network. Now virtually every country in Europe has got one. Spain's got the largest high-speed network. But France, they didn't do it all at once. It wasn't done overnight. In fact, they opened their first high-speed line in 1981. But it started roughly 25 to 30 kilometres south of Paris, and it went to Lyon, which is about 3/4 of the way down the country. That was the first bit they opened. It took them another 20 years before they finished that line from Paris all the way down to Marseille. But what that first section showed the passengers and the French public was that travelling so much faster and reducing the journey times makes travelling throughout their country so much quicker and
more efficient and more pleasurable. So what do you then, the idea of calling time on the link from Birmingham to Manchester, what do you make of that?
Well, personally, it would be cheaper. I think it will inevitably be built. It's going to be built because once passengers start using the high-speed bit from Birmingham down to London, they'll suddenly realise, because most people have never been on high-speed trains, let's be honest.
That's true, yeah.
Most people go on holiday by plane. But those of us who've worked with high-speed trains, I spent 20 years at Eurostar seeing the passenger numbers grow considerably. People used to say the Channel Tunnel will be a white elephant, people won't use it. But now, before the pandemic hit, virtually every train was filled.
Yeah.
What's going to happen once people start using the British high-speed train from Birmingham down to London? They'll see the advantages of it.
And then it becomes even more of a betrayal of the North when they say,
exactly,
because you see what you haven't got.
Exactly, very much. But don't forget, although the high-speed line, the actual infrastructure will, if this Manchester bit gets cancelled by the Tory government, it doesn't mean to say that the North won't get high-speed trains. They will, because although the infrastructure will finish just north of Birmingham, the high-speed trains will then, they'll go fast from London just north of Birmingham, then they'll be joining the classic lines and running at about half the speed. So they will carry on to Manchester, and they will carry on to, they'll even going up to Glasgow and Edinburgh and Liverpool. It's just that without building the high-speed line all the way through to Manchester, it's going to lengthen the journey time. So high-speed trains will reach the parts of the country that they were always envisaged to reach. It's just that without building that Manchester bit, you only get the advantages of high speed.
And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you get this, I don't know whether it's a disconnect, Peter, or you don't know what something does until it's there. And the more we talk about it, the more the calculation to call time on it, regardless of how over budget it may have become, is kind of harder to grasp. And especially, so I saw some talk this morning of a possible snap election, because these are all quite easily packaged policies, aren't they? We're going to abolish inheritance tax. Just don't mention that only 4% of estates generally are eligible for it. Although, actually, interesting psychology, even when people find out they're not going to have to pay it, or 96% of the population finds out that whatever they inherit, if they inherit anything, it won't be eligible for inheritance tax. There's something about an inheritance tax that people do seem to find inappropriate or unjust, but that looks like an election thing. It doesn't affect much money in terms of bottom lines, but it's a kind of an election-y thing. We're going to cancel HS2. That looks like the opposite. So where are all the people who would welcome the cancelling of HS2? Because Rishi Sunak's calculation is twofold. A, you exist, and B, you're more likely to be in the north and the Midlands than you are to be in the southeast, because you're the ones that are going to be denied it, and that's something you're going to welcome. That's the bit I don't get, the politics of it, never mind the logistics. But we've got another 15 minutes, so there's plenty of time for you to fill that space. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:45. It is 11:49 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm learning a lot today, which is always nice. Reims, which is in the Champagne region of France, has a high-speed station, TGV or TGV, I don't know, in 45 minutes now to central Paris, Miranda tells me, which means it's 140 kilometres. And since they've opened that station, lots of Parisians have moved there, making the commute cheaper, the quality of life has improved, and it's become a bit of a tech hub. So, the more we learn about this, the more it would seem to be, if they do pull the plug, correct to describe it as a betrayal of the North, which is a very odd thing to do given the logistics of the 2019 election and the discovery or the emergence of the so-called Red Wall. It's 10 to 12. I'm taking it off the list of things we'll never talk about again. I'm quite enjoying this. After a rocky start, things have improved. Raymond is in Uxbridge. Raymond, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that Labour are to blame for all the troubles of HS2.
Oh.
It was baked in the planning from the beginning.
Yes.
In 2009, they decided that the best way to get to Birmingham would be to tunnel under West London, build the biggest viaduct in Western Europe across the lakes at Harefield and Denham, and then tunnel under the Chilterns. I defy you to find a more expensive route.
How would you have done it?
Gone up. The Romans knew the way.
What? The Romans?
Street.
The Romans didn't build railways.
Yeah. No, they didn't build, but they knew the best route. The canal builders knew the best way to Birmingham.
They couldn't tunnel, could they? I mean, we've got... You're familiar with the London Underground. I know it's overground at Uxbridge, but the technology improved immeasurably with the Victorians, and tunnelling was much more efficient.
And they didn't need to tunnel.
Right.
They went up past Mill Hill.
Who, the Romans?
Through that gap. Yeah, in Watling Street.
Okay. I mean, this is a novel. No, I like it. So they should never mind tunnelling. We should forget about tunnelling. We should have done what the Romans would have done.
Yeah, well, we should have followed the route because it is the logical route.
Here's the thing.
Way that
Go on.
The M1 went that way to Birmingham.
I know. What about the Egyptians? What would the Egyptians have done? What would the Egyptians have done?
Never mind about the Egyptians. Just think about what I'm
hang on
saying.
a minute. Why are you bringing the Romans into it?
To tunnel under West London.
But what about the London Underground?
Yes, but this is the cost you've got to concentrate on.
But just the precedent of tunnelling under West London had already been established.
On this leg,
what happened?
They could have finished the rest of it.
What happened in December 2010?
tell you, the Tories got in, and I agree with you.
They got in May. They got in May 2010. So in January 2009, Labour set up HS2 Limited. In December 2010, it was the Tory Lib Dem coalition that announced what was going to happen. They reviewed the plans and announced the Y-shaped route to Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds would be put out for consultation. So that would be David Cameron and Nick Clegg. In January 2012, the Conservative Transport Secretary Justine Greening gave the green light. So just run us through how it was all Labour's fault again.
Well, because they planned the original unsustainable.
No, they didn't even put a single shovel in the ground. The plans were reviewed in December 2010 by the coalition, and the green light was issued by the Tory Transport Secretary Justine Greening in January 2012. So just explain how that was Labour's fault.
So Labour and Conservatives...
No, you said it was all Labour's fault. And then you talked about the Romans, and now I'm steering you back to the people who actually made the decisions and issued the green lights.
The natural route from London to Birmingham.
Yes, which they should have done it like Watling Street.
West London and building the most...
But why are you blaming Labour for that, though? Why are you blaming Labour for that when they were...
That was in their original plans.
Well, there was nothing to stop them changing the plans in December 2010 and then issuing the green light in January 2012.
Quite true.
Well, there we go. We got there in the end, Raymond. But up the Romans.
Well, I did have a word with Boris. I don't know if you know, I live in Uxbridge.
I did mention that.
About 3 years ago.
Oh, yes.
And I said to him, why don't you use the old Central Railway route? Loads of the infrastructure still there. You'll save 60% of your costs. Yeah. And he said, the technicians tell me that's too difficult. Because I said to him, you could take that money you save and build a route from Liverpool to Leeds and cement us in the north. Oh. But they didn't listen to me, so...
Well, more fool him. And I'll tell you what, and look what happened to him, Raymond. There's a lesson there for all of us.
There is indeed.
Mind how you go. We're staying in Uxbridge. Sarah's there. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Thanks
Sarah.
for taking my call.
You're very welcome. What have the Romans ever done for you?
Well, the only thing that Raymond was right about there was that it is in the wrong place, the route.
Right.
It is curving up the Colne Valley, which is a really important water production area with our
But that's all that's over and done with now. That's
It isn't. If you go and look at it today,
yes,
you'll see.
No, but no one's suggesting that they don't do that.
Been built.
Yes.
There's nowhere where it's ready for the track at all. You know,
no one is suggesting that we don't pull the. No one's suggesting that we pull the plug on that bit.
I'm suggesting that. I think that's the only sensible thing to do.
Right.
Scrap the whole thing because the moment
they're spending £71 billion.
£136 million every week.
Yes.
They're spending today £136 million every week. It is a rip-off.
Okay.
It is a con.
What?
It's almost like a shell company, HS2. They've got these main contractors that are...
it's not, no, careful. Don't do any libels. Don't do any libels. I thought we were going to be safe this hour. All right, okay. But so that's two people in Uxbridge who don't like it. Everyone in the north is quite keen. That's a balance. Thank you, Sarah. Shane's in Leeds. I bet you like it.
Like HS2? Yes, I do. But I think the last two...
Do you know why that is?
Go on.
Because you're not in Uxbridge.
Well, I think those last two callers just answered your question about who's going to like it.
Yes.
But what I wanted to say was, as somebody who's familiar with the public transport infrastructure in Japan, I just want to ask, why are we so bad at delivering infrastructure projects?
That's a very good question.
Since the year 2000, Japan has managed to open 3 Shinkansen lines and 2 extensions. 3 complete new lines, 2 extensions.
Yes.
Bangkok has managed to build 6 light railway, mass transport rail.
I just need to correct something. The Colne Valley has actually just had a huge viaduct built to stop the valley being ripped up, Lawrence tells me. So I don't even know whether that's true or not, but I'm reading it out live on the program. Professional.
But I mean,
well, you tell me you can't ring in with these riddles. Why do you think, as someone who knows a lot about Japanese railway infrastructure, why do you think we're so bad at it?
Partly because of local objections, I think.
Yes, people like Sarah.
Yeah, well, yes, and partly because the planning is so bad here. Costs seem to rise exponentially. But anybody who's used a high-speed rail will tell you that it is really important. It increases the catchment area of businesses, which is why.
So what are they playing at then? Why are the Tories talking about nixing the Birmingham to Manchester bit?
Possibly because of your people in Uxbridge, I reckon.
Oh.
It's an election plot because there were so many people against it to start with.
They were.
That he's trying to get their votes onto his side. That he may have lost.
It's hard to see who that. I mean, with respect to Raymond and Sarah, the objections they raised are unlikely to be addressed much by calling off the Birmingham to Manchester link. That's not the problematic bit for either of them.
The other group will be the people who thought that it was far too expensive and the money should have been spent on local infrastructure.
But they've already spent it now.
Well, yes, but sound bites and whatnot.
Sound bites and whatnot.
Who's going to look too closely at the figures? I mean, that would be insane to look at the figures and make a decision based on that.
Well, you would have thought so. It's curiouser and curiouser, isn't it? Just out of interest, how come you are au fait with the transport infrastructure of Japan? It's an odd enthusiasm.
I used to travel there quite a lot.
Did you?
Yes.
Different world.
I did.
Different world.
Yes, completely. Public transport is just unbelievable there.
What about those pictures I saw as a schoolboy of people being pushed onto trains with long sticks?
That does happen, but it's only... Yes, but it's only true on the urban lines at peak time.
Not the national, not the big transnational lines.
No, those ones have enough room for you to.
So it's the equivalent of the tube, really. The ones where you get pushed on board with a big stick.
Yes.
Do you know, under my glorious rule, I'm going to introduce that to the London railways, but only in Uxbridge.
Oh, that will please Sarah.
Everywhere else you'll be fine, but in Uxbridge you got what they were like big. Have you ever seen these pictures? They're amazing. It's like a pillow on a stick, and it's so crammed. I mean, good knows the rush hour's bad enough here, but they're pushing people on, cramming them in, and then the doors shut. It's an absolute nightmare. Thank you, Shane. Well, that was interesting, wasn't it? For all sorts of reasons. Some of them expected, some of them not so much. But I think we can all agree that the HS2 issue is certainly one that prompts a lot of excitement. Blimey James writes this unsigned texter: this is more fun than Mystery Hour. I'm inclined to agree. I was certainly in the same ballpark. And we will return to it, no doubt, in the future, and by which point possibly I'll know a little bit more than I do now. I've got a strange one for you next. Stick around. It is 4 minutes after 12, and we're going to have a completely unexpected conversation now, prompted by, and it's a real mark of a brilliant columnist, when just an angle on an issue that you hadn't previously noted before can prompt an entire hour of radio. It's by Nesreen Malik in The Guardian, who's one of my favourite writers already, but I hadn't thought about this before because it's not about me. I have noted that the hard-working family, you know that the hard-working family, everything in politics is about hard-working families, which, as someone who routinely puts in a 3-hour-a-day shift, I did feel a little alienated by. What about families like me? What about not hard-working, but well-rewarded? What about that? I mean, who speaks for me in modern Britain? Who speaks for the 3-hour-a-day? 1%ers. That's it. I mean, who's addressing that? But that's not obviously what she's writing about today. She's writing about being single, which I'm not sure we've ever done on the programme before. We may have done it once in the context of holidays. I do remember being slightly surprised by the premiums attached to holidaying alone and the businesses that are dedicated to providing. But if you think about it, you almost always go away as a couple. Or with a mate, I suppose. And therefore, the cost is halved. Everything you get costs the same if you're on your own, but you're splitting it between two of you. And in the context of politics, it's actually really interesting. And what I like about this as well, apart from my well-established enthusiasm for things I don't know much about and stories that aren't about me, we also have the fact that it's not party political, this. It applies equally to everybody. So the Tories are always banging on about hard-working families, hard-working tax-paying families who should be rewarded. These are quotes from Rishi Sunak. They've sort of appointed the hard-working family, Nesrine writes, as a victimised group that must be protected from overzealous policies that care little for real people. While we focus on helping hard-working families, Sunak said last week, all Keir Starmer does is punish them. Keir Starmer, meanwhile, is talking about hard-working families and how Labour is working for a future where families come first in a country where, and I quote, many of Britain's hard-working families are at breaking point. So Sunak and Starmer are squabbling over the hard-working families of Britain, both claiming to represent the hard-working families of Britain. We will leave out, for the purposes of this conversation, the not hard-working families. And we'll focus on the not families instead, the single people. It's a very strange one, isn't it? That the single person is almost entirely ignored by political discourse. And until I read this article today, I hadn't even clocked it. It's never easy being single. You can't split a deposit. You can't split the rent or insurance or energy bills or more. Cheaper to do the food shop for two per person than it is for one. Cheaper to share a car and split the cost of filling the tank. Cheaper to share one internet bill and streaming account. You've got two incomes coming in and quite a lot of the time only one outgoing on stuff like this. So traditionally the estimate is that people need to spend about 10% more of their disposable income than two-person households. But what I'm interested in now is how a cost of living crisis changes that figure and why single people have become invisible to policymakers. So what's it like being single? I know it's not easy being green because Kermit the Frog told me, but what's it like being single, particularly and especially in this cost of living crisis? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. But the politics of it, when the two main party leaders seem to be arguing about who's best placed to represent hard-working families, seems really, really weird, because about 30% of all households are people living alone. About 8.3 million people live alone, and that constitutes about 30% of all households. So have you noticed this? Have you noticed this? That you are not actually part of the conversation. You're not part of the political conversation. There's almost a sort of rhetorical disenfranchisement underway that I simply hadn't noticed. I wonder whether you had. I presume, like Nesrine, that you have done, because it's you that's being essentially ignored. So in addition to the question of what's it like being single in the cost of living crisis, what has really come home to you as a consequence of your circumstances, but also, is it fair to suggest that you are politically irrelevant? Do you feel that you are not being recognised by political discourse in this country? This is what I mean by not having clocked it myself. Yeah, I always have that slight internal giggle when I hear about hard-working families. Because I do work hard, and I work for much more than 3 hours a day. And until relatively recently, I was working every afternoon as well on my new book, How They Broke Britain, which is out on November the 2nd. You can find a link to pre-ordering it in my Twitter bio at Mr. James OB, or indeed all reputable websites. But I do work hard. I pretend that I don't work hard because I clock off at 1 o'clock, and everybody thinks I just sort of go to the pub and put my feet up. And some days I do, but I do work hard because I'm never off duty. I once said on air that I work harder than builders, and the right-wing corners of social media had a absolute field day for about 4 hours when we then released the clip of me saying, I think that lots of people are going to pretend not to understand what I just said and have a right-wing field day in some corners of Twitter. That was fun. I mean, that shows how hard I work. Even when I'm on duty, I'm off duty, and even when I'm off duty, I'm on. But I don't know of the politics. All you hear now is talk of hard-working families, and you sit there thinking, well, I work bloody hard, but I'm not I am single. 2 questions, because I don't want to exclude hard-working families from this conversation. 2 questions. What's it like? What was it like? And why are they doing this? Is it just sort of sprung up by accident? Also, what is a hard-working family? You might work hard, but I bet you've got a teenager who doesn't, Or you might be working really hard, but your husband's phoning it in every day, sometimes literally. What is a hard work? Why have hard-working families become the political? What's the word I'm looking for? The focus. The focus. There it is. Yeah, the focus of political discourse in this country. 11 minutes after 12 is the time. So there's a couple of ways into this. The first way is, what is it like being single? And the second way is, why are single people being ignored politically? 0345 6060 973. And then the third way, of course, is, why do you think, and this is something that we can all join in on, why do you think the hard-working family has become the focus of political discourse for both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer? And because I can answer the third question, but not the first two, I'm going to have a little think out loud. Because it conveys, as Nesri Malik in this brilliant column suggests, it conveys a form of bogus victimhood. A hell of a lot of British politics during this strangely populist period has been about bogus victimhood. Think about Farage. He's always a victim of something or other. He's always whining about being unfairly treated, whether it's by Brussels or by his bank. Or he really did claim once when he was late for an event that the traffic jams were caused by immigration. He's always bloody whining. Never stops whining. Whine. All the whining. And in order for your whining to have political traction, it has to invoke victimhood. So we are victims of the European Union. We are victims of immigration. We are victims of refugees or whatever it might be. And hard-working families are being cast as victims by both of these characters. I don't think it works, does it? I just don't get it. It's like, where families come first. Well, who comes second then, Keir Starmer? If families come first, who comes second? Single people. How's that a good idea electorally? Vote for me where single people come second, or third or fourth. Many of Britain's hard-working families are at breaking point. Is that what we're talking about here? As a member of a family, you're more likely to feel that you're close to breaking point than you would do if you were a single person? The data suggests otherwise to me. It seems to me that you've got further. You've got to spread less further than people who are in families. You know, even food, fresh food, going off in the fridge, being cheaper to buy more. I can't see the logic in the prioritisation, that's another good word, the prioritisation of so-called hard-working families by Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. So actually, that might be the most interesting question. Why are they doing it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And then the question of singleness, singletude. What's the word? Singleness. Being single, solitude. It's not singularity. No, that means something quite different, Keith. Singledom, singleopitude, singlash. What does it mean politically? Do your politics change if you're single? Do you feel excluded? And what's it actually like? I like this. Speaking as a member of a hard-working family, James, I get up at 5:30 every morning to make sure my wife gets to work. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm here all week. Try the veal. It's coming up to 12:15. So there's quite a lot to get your teeth into there. But really, the prioritisation of the hard-working family and the concomitant neglect of the single voter. There it is. Your thoughts on those two things, what I just said. 0345 6060 973. I should do all introductions like that. I'll just burble on for 20 minutes, and then at the end I'll say your thoughts on those things, what I just said. 0345 6060 973. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. It's not easy being single, but politically you don't exist anymore. Had you noticed this? And of course the costs as well. But the politics of it is the more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not nebulous. It's nuanced. I know what it's. I can get my head around the money side of it really, really easily. Right? My wife and I live in one house, so everything is split down the middle. Technically, and if I lived on my own, I'd have to spend a lot more of my income on just surviving. So I get that, but I want to hear more about it. But the political, which I hadn't noticed before Nesri Malik pointed it out this morning on page 3 of the comment section of G2, the middle of The Guardian, that it's literally the conversation completely ignores you. I'm wondering, A, whether you noticed, and B, how you feel about it. Gary's in Bournemouth. Gary, what would you like to say?
James,
Gary.
you've absolutely hit a nerve.
Well, it's not me. It's Nezreen Malik, actually. It's a brilliant column. I can't recommend it highly enough. But go on, tell me more.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I listen to your show virtually every day. Don't ask me what I'm doing on the other days.
No,
but
but what are you doing?
Pretty much every... No, I said don't ask me.
Oh, sorry.
But pretty much every topic that you cover over the weeks, months, years... As a single person, I often look at it and I think, well, this is double the problem to me. So whether it's, the price of mortgages going up, whether it's cost of living, everything, you're not sharing the cost with anyone. And it has such a massive impact on us as single people. Now, I must admit, I haven't got any children.
I was about to say, there is a balance here. A significant part of a lot of people's cash is going on the kids. But that's not the conversation we're having today.
Yeah, but I think you'll probably I'm sure you'll get a lot of calls from people who are single parents, and that's not necessarily of their own choosing either.
Very true.
And I think very much that term, hard-working families, really irritates me whenever it's used, because I think it's just a ploy to get a certain group of people to vote.
But why is it? Why say families and not just people? Why not just say hard-working people? What's it speaking to? It must be speaking to something that we can't quite pin down, because it's alienating you. It is deliberately or not. It is actively alienating you. You are not a member of a hard-working family. You are a hard-working Gary.
Well, I'm on my lunch break at the moment, but it doesn't seem like it at the moment. Maybe it's because it's aspirational. Maybe it's because people like myself don't want to be single necessarily.
Okay, fair enough.
So maybe they're appealing to the better nature of me, that I would rather be in a family unit than I would be living on my own. But the fact that we're just completely ignored, I just find it so frustrating.
Well, yeah, I do too. When do you really notice it? Just out of interest, you mentioned mortgages. Well, where else for the kind of where you think, crikey, that really is that really is a sort of penalty?
Well, I think anything that comes out of your bank account, because there isn't anything other than stuff that you buy for yourself as an individual that you wouldn't be getting a contribution from someone else. So I mentioned to your producer earlier that council tax is a really good example of it.
Isn't there a bit of a benefit? Don't you get a single person's discount?
You do.
25, but it's only 25%. It's not 50%.
25%.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you're almost punished for being single. And actually, being single is quite expensive.
Yes.
Because you really want to go out and meet people and do as many things as possible. But actually, with the current cost of living, I think that it really does actually impact the opportunity to even meet people.
Yeah, of course it does. And a night in is a very different proposition if you're on your Todd compared to what it is if you're living with someone that you love or, are still sort of quite fond of, if you're lucky. Thank you, Gary. You're not alone for what it's worth. I bet you knew that already. Richard in Great Yarmouth says, this is why I love your show, James. It always seems to talk to me. I've sadly just become single over the last few months after my 15-year marriage ended. And I've been left with having to find an extra £1,500 a month on top of the ever-increasing prices that have happened over the last few years. It's entirely new for me. I'm only 33. I married my high school love. I'm extremely hardworking, self-employed, and an overall good egg. I've gone from eating out regularly, planning holidays and sharing my life with someone, to lonely evenings and finding myself extra busy as to pass the time and earn the money to continue paying the bills. Thank goodness for LBC. That's a lovely thing to say, Richard, but I'm sorry that you find yourself in the circumstances that you describe, and that added dimension of being more or less completely ignored by politics is just bizarre, isn't it? What is the reasoning behind this? Oh, you don't matter? Or you're going to vote anyway? Or why talk about hardworking families all the time instead of hardworking people? There must be some psychology in play. I don't know what it is. Anne is in Dendermonde in Belgium. Anne, what would you like to say?
I'd like to point out that it's not a purely British phenomenon. We have it on the continent too.
Do you?
I think, yeah. Absolutely, and it's getting more and more people in who are single, like me, are getting fed up with it. And I think there's an element for the Tories, at least, of cultural wars to it. The family nucleus, the 2.4 children, the ideal. If you don't have a family, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yes.
And the reason why they do it is both for Tories and Labour and the Lib Dems is that it's not a vote loser. So they're not going to lose any votes. It's not like you have a viable alternative, like for ecological matters, you would go to the Green Party.
Sure.
there's not a party advocating for single people here. It could be a vote winner because it's anecdotal, but we had here in Belgium, we had a woman who was on the list for the electoral list for what is our equivalent of the Lib Dem.
Right.
And she started saying that whenever there's a legislation put in place, there should be an assessment on what the impact will be on single families. So
yes,
either widows or whatever. And her vote share went up enormously during the next election. So it is a potential vote winner. So as to why politicians don't look into it, it's a bit of a mystery to me, because there's 1/3, in my country, it's about 1/3 of families. I don't think the figures are vastly different in the UK. 1/3 of families are single
1/3 of households.
All households.
Yeah. 30% of all households, 8.3 million people living alone. Millions of others, of course, will be in shared accommodation. So, you know, the numbers are really big, and yet you've got all of these politicians talking about the hard-working family. I mean, so if you are a member of a hard-working family, I don't think you notice it even. And yet if you're not, you feel excluded. It's a very odd political play, isn't it? Very odd gambit.
It is.
And yet,
I think it's probably that they haven't caught up. Well, as usual with politicians, they haven't caught up with society yet.
Childcare costs.
Yeah.
But that can apply to a single parent. So single parent, well, actually, if you're a single parent, I wonder whether you feel that a hard-working family is language to describe you or not, whether it would just be non-parents, single non-parents who are excluded. I don't know. But it's a very weird one, and it resonates most. One texter says it's terminology that resonates most with working class people. I don't know what that's based on. I don't know that I agree, but there's a calculation in here somewhere, Anne, and at the moment it is eluding all of us. It just seems a very odd phraseology. And don't forget, we're also looking at the penalties, really, the penalties, the costs of being single. My daughter's partner left her when their son was 10 months old, says this texter. He paid £800 towards bills before. Now he only has to pay £250 a month. So her dad and I are helping out with the deficit. She's an NHS nurse, and if we weren't helping her, she'd have to go on benefits. She works hard for her and her son and has to count every penny. She would rather work. She's cancelled Sky and anything else that she thinks is a luxury. And Martin suggests that this is purely about appealing to floating voters. But single people are just as likely to be floating voters, aren't they? I wonder if more family units may have more floating voters in them, and therefore a tendency to vote Tory as well. And that's from Martin in Hawley. I don't see it at the moment. Nikki's in Devizes. Nikki, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Before I forget, I'm coming to see you in Bath. Very
Fantastic.
excited about
So
that.
am I. Thank you, Nikki. Looking forward to it. Sold out, sadly, but anyone in Southampton, there's still a few tickets left. Carry on.
So I'm basically going to echo a lot of what Gary said. It drives me mad, this. So I'm in my late 40s. It feels like there's an assumption that anyone sort of in my age bracket who's single and has been sort of single probably most of their life, or just hasn't got married and had children, that there's an assumption that we've all had high-flying careers, we're all earning 60, 70k plus, got amazing jobs and have got no problems at all. Not all of us have. I had chronic fatigue when I was in my 20s and 30s. I was never able to build up a great income. And now I've got my own bookkeeping business. I get by. But
people think you've made a decision not to have a family in order to concentrate on money, on material things.
I mean, people around, my friends and stuff, they know what I'm about. But and this hard-working family thing drives me round the bend.
I can see why.
And even then, gym memberships are more expensive if you're single. If you go over,
are they?
Well,
because you can have a family membership or a couple's membership.
Well, so you can have a couple's membership, and it works out £5 cheaper per month per person.
That's not
and
fair.
I've had arguments with but it's really unfair, and it's a marketing ploy, but it still penalises. And the council tax thing. Why is the council tax only 25% cheaper?
Well, it's a tax on a house.
Yeah.
Not a tax on how many people are in it. That was the poll tax. So I'm not here to defend it, but it isn't quite as unfair as other things might be.
Yeah, and the holidays thing as well drives me round the bend. I mean, it's £2,000 for a week's holiday away somewhere, and again, that's fine. I've got a few friends who are single, have great jobs, and they do that, and that's great.
Yeah,
and
but it's not. No, it is. It's very. So, what do you think? What's the calculation? Do you think then, Nikki, when they say we're hard-working family? What I mean, we're obviously missing something.
We are being ignored.
I know.
And it's silly because, as you were saying to the last caller or just before, the number of single people now in the UK has grown massively, hasn't it?
I think so.
And I just think they are, and this goes for all the parties. I will not be voting Tory. I am very much opposed to them. Probably why I listen to your show. But,
don't know what you mean.
I don't know what I mean either, James. But it's like we don't exist.
Is it about deserving? So listen to this. This is what Nesreen wrote today. Single people's invisibility is part of a larger, longer shift in politics towards proving that government is only there for people who deserve support. Families are more deserving than singles, and working people are more deserving than people who aren't in work, cannot work due to disability or illness, or do care work that is unrecognised and unpaid. So there's actually something quite sinister about it. You are being cast as someone who doesn't deserve help, and I, as a politician, am here to help people not like you.
It's like our opinion doesn't matter.
It is.
If we're single.
Well, it matters here, Nikki, and it will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. I'm a little bit embarrassed that I hadn't really clocked this before, that I hadn't noticed this myself, although my defence would be, I suppose, that I'm not single. Nesreen also quotes the Times columnist from Matthew Parris, of course, former Tory MP. It's always been a Tory message. He told the BBC in 2005 when the BBC noted the ubiquity of the phrase hard-working families in New Labour rhetoric, the idea of no free rides and no feather bedding. So it creates the idea that if you're not in a hard-working family, you're taking the mickey, you're swinging the lead, you're on the lam, you're getting help you don't deserve. It's a very, very weird thing, this. 12:35 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I nearly forgot where I was then, on LBC. And the conversation about singledom and politics is really, really interesting. And what's interesting about it is the difficulty of pinning down the reason for it beyond Nesreen Malik's own analysis in The Guardian today, which is that single people are part of that section of society being cast as undeserving. And, I mean, she's pretty clear on who else is in that category. You probably are as well. You're talking about people that don't deserve help, and by talking about the hard-working family, you are identifying the people that do, but subconsciously or implicitly identifying the people that don't deserve support. Families are more deserving than singles, and working people are more deserving than people who aren't in work, regardless of the reason why they might not be in work. It's a pretty grim analysis, which at the moment I can't find fault with. Listen, she goes further. The worst sin of all is to appear to help someone who has been made unpopular in the public mind. Now, she lists immigrants, unemployed people and disabled people, but adds single people to that list. And having spoken to all of the callers today, I'm afraid I would have been reluctant to put single people on that list. But I'm not anymore. I think she's bang on. But that is directly as a consequence of having listened to your calls. The second worst sin is to dare to think of spending to reverse the damage that has brought all but the most privileged to breaking point. And so claiming to come up with solutions only for deserving hard workers and families becomes an alibi for this political dereliction. I mean, I can see that applying almost completely to the Tories, but it's doubly troubling to see Keir Starmer joining in. 12:37 is the time. Does it mean Labour won't be spending money to redress imbalances and injustices in our society because the only people that need help are the hard-working families, i.e., arguably, often the least vulnerable members of society are the ones most in need of help, is the direction of traffic here. There's a couple of phone lines free if you want to add to this conversation. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Paul in Guildford says, you're assuming that both adults in the family work. I am when I talk about splitting the costs, but I'm not actually, because if you are going on holiday on one income, that's two people going on holiday instead of one for roughly the same cost. So it's still cheaper per person to be in a couple than it is to be single. But I take your point. He adds, when I raised my children, my wife worked at home raising our kids. We were still a hard-working family and we had 2 votes. Single people only have 1 vote. That could be part of it as well, albeit that there's no guarantee that 2 people would vote in the same way. Jack's in Herne Hill. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello, Jack.
Yeah, I mean, such an interesting article and a topic to talk about. But, I mean, for me, psychologically, I mean, okay, first of all, probably should get over the irony of me calling you and claiming to be a hard-working person when I should really be working right now.
But no one works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no, you know, you either, you know, you're hardworking and you know that you're not, so you know that you are, but you're not the hardworking person if you're single that Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are talking about every day.
And I wonder if there are 2 different approaches with it. The first one being a more of the nice sort of warm, fuzzy feeling, like everyone wants what's best for their families, or you know, when you think of family, it's not necessarily the people that you're living with, there's extended family and all the rest of it, and you want what's best for them. And so appealing to families, like, you know, if you're looking to vote, if you're a swinging voter, you'd be looking to vote for a party that wants what's best for your family as well. So maybe, you know, trying to capture we are the party of families is going to be appealing to a lot of people. So that's kind of one approach. But I guess the other side of it is the more sort of kind of leaning into cultural norms, I guess. Yeah. You know, societally we're expected to, well, for many years was raised to, you know, expected to get married, have kids, and get a place together, you know, 2.5 children and a golden retriever, something like that, you know. Yeah. And so appealing to that ground is not only, you know, families come with, I guess, more stock in society. It could be argued, like they're more likely to own a house, they're more likely to they've got more people who can vote in their household. You do often find if you're raised like in a Tory household, you're more likely to vote Conservative, things like that. So I don't know if maybe. And so
Keir Starmer's playing on their pitch in a way when he joins in with this rhetoric. But I love the notion of well, I don't love it, I hate it. But in terms of intellectual engagement, I love the notion of dereliction here, because it's almost as if they're cutting loose a swathe of the population. We can legislate to look after some of the population, and therefore it will be hard-working families, because that is probably the most electorally advantageous constituency to focus on. But it actually means that implicitly the most vulnerable members of society are being completely ignored by this rhetoric, if not by the policies.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, I think it's more problematic than they probably would have calculated, because you'd think that by saying hardworking, nobody believes they're not hardworking. Like nobody wants to admit they're lazy necessarily. I mean, I could be wrong there, but I think
I mean, it'd be nice to take calls from people who admit they're lazy, but they probably can't be bothered to ring in.
That could be a bit. Yeah, that could be difficult. So yeah, I mean, it could just be ignorance.
What's your position? I know you're single, are you, or?
I mean, do you want my dating profile? Or?
Well, no. but only insofar as it's relevant to this conversation.
Yes. So I'm living in a house of multiple occupants. Yeah, right. Working creative single. So yes.
So what do they mean? So what do they mean when they talk about a hard-working face? It's so strange just to think that there are 8-point-something million people in situations similar to, well, that's households actually. Millions of others in shared accommodation, and yet, as this article says, you are absent from the political rhetoric and the major policy discussions about alleviating pain in the context of cost of living. It's actually madness, but it is. Had you noticed it before? I mean, is it one of those things that if you're in it, you notice it, and if you're not, you don't?
To be honest, I think it's probably the opposite. If you're inside it, you don't really notice. There's only when somebody sort of holds a mirror up to it that you realise what's going on. Like, you know, bring up I've suddenly gone, oh, hang on.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? A good penny drop moment. It's not unlike what we try to do on the show most days, but it's fallen to Nesri Malik to do it in The Guardian today. Jack, thank you. 12:42, coming up to 12:43 is the time. And I mean, it's incredible, really, because I'm normally very good at telling you who they come for next. I normally, because, once you allow the country of birth to be the basis upon which you decide whether or not someone is a valuable or a non-valuable member of society, then you leave the door open. So I told you that they'd be coming for the long-term sick, for example. I told you that not long ago. Look out for the attacks from this government on the long-term sick. There'll be attempts to frame them as feckless, attempts to frame them as dishonest, attempts to frame them as work shy, all of those things, because they want to reduce help, remove help. Labour aren't doing this, but the Tories obviously are, and they've piled in on it. And I could tell you which members of the public sector they'll come for, even if they're not on strike. But I've never once thought of single people. And they're not demonised in the way that the other categories that are listed in this article are actively and deliberately demonised. I think people with disabilities and illnesses are now in danger of being demonised. Actually, no, I think you are already being demonised. We know that immigrants are routinely demonised. We know that unemployed people are routinely demonised. I don't know that single people are being routinely demonised, but the rationale for ignoring them is the same. It is a notion of deserving and undeserving. And a single person is less deserving of government help than a member of a hard-working family. It's crazy business. Layla is in Great Harwood in Lancashire. Layla, what would you like to say?
Gosh, quite a lot, actually.
Hang on. Shall I come to you? Because it's actually, I've just looked at the clock. Shall I come to you after the break?
Yep, all right.
Is that all? Because it's 12:44 and 36 seconds, and I'm supposed to go at 12:45. I rarely do, but
I mean, this is a few more seconds being lost, so I'll come back to me after the break.
It's normally me that says that to the caller, but it's not actually. We're not losing seconds here because I've already decided that I'm going to come back to you after the break. So going to the break bang on time, which is still 4 seconds hence, would be close to a first for everybody. 12:48 is the time. With no further ado, Layla in Great Harwood, what would you like to say about this? The purge. What is it? The persecution of the singleton, Layla.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's new. I think. Do you know what? Well, I'll start off with. Do you know what arrow ace means?
Arrow what?
Arrow ace.
No.
Okay, so arrow ace is a sexual identity where you are aromantic, asexual.
Oh, I knew that. Yes, okay. So if you'd spelt it, I would have known what you were talking about. Sorry,
right.
I didn't.
Okay.
I wasn't expecting that to pop up in this part of the conversation.
Well, because it does kind of link. Because
Yes.
arrow ace people are less likely to be in a relationship.
Sure.
And as an arrow ace person, you're more. I guess you kind of realise that the society is very amatornimative.
Yes.
Which means, like, we expect to be coupled up.
Yes.
So because of that, and I mean, historically, single people have been villainized. Single women were often persecuted as witches.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
In Jane Austen's time, the term ape leader actually, for a single woman, actually meant leading demons in hell.
Right.
So, yeah, but no, I think I've been aware of it since my very early 20s when the bedroom tax was coming up.
Yes.
And I was like, well, what about me? I live by myself.
Yes.
What's going to happen to me? And I don't think it's a conscious decision.
By the politicians?
I think that they are. Yes, there is a deliberate conscious decision to use the word family because family evokes children and it's the same language as, who will save the children?
Okay. But if you haven't got... Oh, okay, so that might not alienate non-parents because, you know, as you say, the general social sense of, looking after the children is a good thing. You don't feel alienated by that. But they're saying you're not hard-working as well.
Well, no, I don't. I live with my sister, so for me it doesn't actually consider that, but it's more the actual policies.
Go on.
Less the rhetoric that bother me. Because in terms of actual policy, I am often, there's everything to do with money.
Yes.
I'm also radically disadvantaged by. But when they start saying, we're going to give if you have more than so many people in your household, you can get help to get, I don't know, solar panels put on your roof.
Yes.
And it's like, well, I can't. And I wanted to adopt, but I can't adopt because I have to have an entire year's worth of savings.
Right.
If you are, like, your entire annual salary in savings, if you were adopting as a single person. Not every council. This is a council I lived in before.
Yes, I understand. So what's the word we're looking at? It's discrimination then, really. It's a sort of quiet or a silent discrimination.
It is. It is a discrimination, and it's based on the outdated need for couples, because we did historically, evolutionarily, it was better for society to have people producing children and being in
that's why
safety.
why religions were so dedicated to supporting that norm as well, as sort of keeping the flock, keeping go forth and multiply. Yeah. You can't do that if you're not in a relationship. Would be the logic of the medieval.
Yeah. And if you're individual, and like now we kind of live individualistic lives, so it's not even like we live in communities that are connected. We're kind of, if you're single, you're essentially on your own.
Yeah.
And
it's really odd, but when you look at the numbers, I mean, you make sense, and your description makes sense, but the numbers make a bit of a mess of the politics until you sort of think of it as being a salami slicing of the parts of society that we're going to bother addressing, and you can see the appeal of thinking, well, we can get elected even if we completely ignore them. And then, of course, it makes governing somehow cheaper. Maybe, I don't know. Layla, thank you. As you were speaking, this text came in, which I think speaks to some of the themes that you addressed. The cult of the hard-working family is a bit like the cult of motherhood, James. Our society is built on the assumption that everyone will couple up, i.e. grow up, want kids, and everyone will have them. Our notion of what is moral and what is the natural order of things, as well as our economies, will collapse in no time if this isn't true. Consciously or not, we punish people, women in particular, who don't validate the lifestyle choices of the majority and go against the grain. That's exactly what Layla was talking about. Choosing to have a lifestyle that doesn't leave you broke, worried if you can cover your housing, heating, food bills at the end of every month, is still seen as immature, selfish and worthy of demonisation. The irony is that by financially punishing singletons, you make them even less likely to find the stability they would need if they wanted to build a family. That's from JP in Crystal Palace, beautifully put. Steve's in Beckenham. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Steve. I became single reluctantly because my partner passed away. My wife passed away.
I'm sorry, Steve. I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. So I'm now single.
Yes.
Essentially, it's only 3 months. It's quite raw.
Of course.
And so I'm not quite up with the economics of it, although it's obvious. Previous callers have said the obvious stuff. What was 2 is now 1, and and all that. But my main sort of point is the phrase "hardworking families."
Yeah.
And I think that the lady, your last caller, I'd like to touch on what she said. I mean, what is a family?
Yeah.
I have 2 grown-up daughters. One is she's in Peru at the moment, but the other one is gay and lives with her partner and has done for many years, and they have a beautiful child. And I don't think when Richie or Starmer talk about this, I don't think they're referring to them.
No.
I think that the idea of the family is mummy, daddy, and 2.4 children or whatever, and it's odd. And
it's a bit conformist, isn't it? It's got a touch of the family values to it from the 80s, from John Major's era, 90s, really.
But if I could just switch, if you look at what the family is in Dickens, for instance, there are no what we would call nuclear families. There's no mummy, dad. It's all fractured. It's all friendships. It's a
really good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah, clinging together. And this is from the Victorian age, from the writer who we associate with family values
and rectitude. But no, you're right. There are a lot more blended families than you would have expected.
So as for me being single, I mean, I'm still, as I say, I'm still trying to come to terms with it.
Yeah, of course.
Coming home to an empty home, etc.
Yeah.
That's something.
And how does that phrase hit you then? That phrase, hard-working families, which deliberately excludes you.
It seems to, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
I mean, it's as I think you reported earlier that it's not new. I mean, Blair and Brown used it extensively, and I found it irritating then.
I missed it. I just missed it. I don't know why I missed it. But I mean, you just do sometimes.
I could be misthinking, but I think Thatcher might have used it as well. But I definitely remember Blair and Brown sort of. I mean, I thought. Who I broadly supported, New Labour, but that irritated me.
It was there. I mean, it was. The BBC noted it in 2005, as this article by Nesrine Malik in The Guardian today attests. It was there, so you see it revived in the current party's tribute act to that era, is how she chooses to put it. It would not be so surprising. Steve, take care, and I am so sorry for your loss. I did not even begin to imagine the shock to the system that you describe and that you're going through. So do look after yourself. Sarah's in Brentwood with the last word on this. So it's going to have to be confined to about a minute, Sarah. What would you like to say?
Okay, I have experience of single parenthood, being single, but what I really want to talk to is the discriminatory HMO policy that the government is directly from the government.
This is multiple homes, people in multiple.
That's right. It used to be sort of 5+ people, but they've lowered the threshold through government policy, additional licensing, etc., down to 3+ people, which effectively excludes single sharers from 3+ bedroom houses or flats, because all the agents will come round to you and say, "Oh, we don't deal with HMOs anymore. Just get a family." I'm a potential landlord and I've got 4 bedrooms. I wanted to rent to 4 sharers.
Right.
But the government policy means I can't afford it because it can cost £10,000 to get the licence in, all the certificates.
When did they change it? I don't know anything about it.
It's additional licensing came in around 2019, depending on what borough you're on.
And what reason did they give for it? Do we know? Because there must have been a rationale behind it.
This is a discriminatory thing, that it's just all HMOs are bad because it causes problems in the area. But because they've lowered the threshold to 3+ people, that's 3+ bedrooms,
Yeah.
But it's not so much the licensing, it's the planning, because the planning is so expensive.
I did say we only had a minute, and I'm afraid I'm not up with what you're describing to me, but it seems to be more examples, perhaps, or more evidence, perhaps, of the single person facing problems that are both avoidable and not faced by couples or by, quotes, hard-working families, end quotes. If you missed any of today's show, you can, of course, listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also rewind live radio and stay up to date with all the latest news from LBC. So rewind live radio on Global Player. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom will be with you at 4, but here is Sangeeta Maiska. 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 Here is Sangeeta